Hello and welcome to another episode of Fundy Tidings. I'm your host Jay Remer, and back again today is Alison Smith and Lorraine Gilmore-Peters. Welcome to the show, ladies.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you for having us.
So Alison, as you recall, is a coach for gentle parenting, and Lorraine is a mindset coach. So we're going to talk today about the importance of making connections with our children. So Alison, what is it about making connections that is so important? Because I think that it's possibly the most important thing that human beings can do is to make connections with other human beings. So I will leave this to you.
It is. It's such a powerful driver. We as humans are hardwired to connect with those around us. And the bond, the potential bond that we have with our primary caregiver really sets a foundation for kids. It allows them to grow up with trust for the world, with a sense of belonging. There's so many aspects of connection that are important, but one that will be particularly interesting to parents, a very strong motivator, is the more connected our children feel with us, the more influence we have with them, the more they want to work with us as opposed to against us. So it's really the most powerful tool that we have as parents to then guide them in the ways that we feel they need to make their way in the world.
Mm-hmm. And so what are some ways that people can use to connect with their children that sort of Mother Nature doesn't provide us with? I mean, there's a certain amount of natural, connectivity, which we have learned, for generations and millennia. But what is the current thinking for how connections could be made more close?
There's lots of ways. So there's physical connection, like hugs and those things that we know about. There's intellectual connection, so having good heated debates that are polite and respectful, those sorts of things that we've heard before. One way is regular time together. One thing that we do in our family, and this is really great for families with any age of children, all the way up to adults, and this is using the idea of a declaration of gratitude. So for example, most families try to set aside at least one meal a day where they eat together. Could be breakfast, could be a snack before bed, whatever it is, some time of day that we get in the habit of making gratitude a part of that. So what we did, even when our children were toddlers, is we would ask them, what made you happy today? And they would talk for quite a while, and we would take turns asking each other and make sure everyone had a turn. Now that they're getting a little bit older, one person at the table, whoever thinks of it first, will say, what are you grateful for today? So we've evolved the language, but the idea is essentially the same. And they'll come up with all kinds of things. It could be, well, I had my birthday party today and that was fun, or I'm really grateful for the supper that Daddy made. And it's not just the idea of feeling grateful for things in our world, but it creates that bond because we're asking each other questions. We're listening, we're commenting on what is important to each other. It gives us a chance to discuss our day and to let each other know that we're important to each other. Mm-hmm. And it gives them that chance too to share their own thoughts and ideas.
Yeah. I know that one of the things that's important is to listen to what other people have to say. And it's one of the great downfalls that we have as humans is that we oftentimes listen with the intent to respond without listening with the intent to understand first. And so I'm wondering, at what age do children actually engage in these kinds of conversations? Because I know, for instance, I know a 2-year-old little boy right now, and he's just beginning to explore conversations, which is very exciting. I mean, it's exciting for me, and he's not my child, but it's very exciting for the parents. And so I'm just wondering, I guess there's sort of a range of ages, but once you recognize that children are beginning to understand what you're saying, is that when these kinds of two-way conversations take place?
I think it comes before that. Connection is even, can I give an example, a
Sure.
real life example? My son and daughter-in-law just had a new baby, and the baby is only 2 months old. But if the mother lays the baby down and leaves the room, every single time that baby cries, because the connection, the connection that baby is used to up to this point, like the constant holding and the feeding and all that, she could sense that was being broken, that the mother was too far away for her liking. So I think even before language, as human beings, we pick up on very subtle energetic cues from one another that words aren't even required. We know if we walk into a room how people feel, what the feeling of the room is. So even before children speak, they know if they have your undivided attention, aka connection. They know if you're distracted, they know if you're working on something, they know if they are the primary focus of your attention, and that's connection.
Well, I think that probably forms instantly. I mean, as soon as a child is born, connections get made. But I was more interested, or I was interested in, my question was about actually engaging children in conversation.
The conversation itself.
Because I think that no matter what the conversation, whether it's you did a terrible job on your math test today, didn't you? And why didn't you study hard enough? And versus the good stuff, there still is going to be a connection. We all grew up with a variety of different kinds of feedback. And what you're suggesting, I think, is to instill positive reinforcement and positive conversations as quickly, as early on as possible. So obviously these kids learn this stuff before they can respond.
So even as infants, there is communication. There's two-way communication. If you've been around a newborn who's being passed around a room for all of the relatives to ooh and ah over the baby, it doesn't take very long before that baby communicates. If we wait too long, it will become loud crying and insist to be taken back to mom. But even before that, there's subtle things. We can learn to read the communication cues. So the turn of the head, or they break eye contact, they start to squirm, or they get very still. So those sorts of things are communication as well, even before they're speaking. Back to the idea of having that gratitude conversation, my kids were 2 when they started contributing to the conversation. And in fact, my daughter at 2 was sometimes reminding us, and she would turn and look at us. And it was such a proud moment for us where we got all teary. Oh, she just asked us. She said, "What are you happy about today, Mommy?" And she was initiating the conversation, which was really special. So it definitely starts young.
Yeah.
And even if they're not speaking back, we're planting a seed for that conversation. We're keeping that responsiveness there so that they learn to trust that we do respond to them, that we are interested in what they have to communicate, whether through words or behavior or body language.
Well, to me it sounds, idyllic. One of the things I think, because this is a new way of approaching parenthood, really, we grew up with a different method. So what I'm going to ask now is, what sort of trigger mechanism or what kind of phrase can we remind ourselves of when we sort of veer back into our old behavior and we know that it's time to reverse course? Do you have any? Because I know I'm always looking for trigger mechanisms to get me to calculate my thought process. What do you suggest in this situation where you're trying to establish positive connections with children?
A powerful phrase for that is connect, then direct. So before we give them a directive or offer our suggestions or ask them to switch gears from one activity to another, or before we need to have one of those tough conversations about, you said you'd be home by 10, it's now 11 o'clock, and we've been worrying, those kinds of conversations. You want to make sure that you're good, that the relationship has a solid reconnection first. The conversations can always wait, even with younger kids, although waiting for a 2-year-old or a 3-year-old might be 2 minutes. We want to make sure that the lines of communication are open and we've built that bridge between us. So that could look like a hug when they come in from school, even though you know you need to talk about that math test. Or complimenting them on the block tower that they just built before calling them to lunch and telling them to leave their morning's project behind. It's recognizing, it's letting them know that we value what they're working on, that we respect what they've been working on or what they're doing and how they're feeling before diving in with our agenda.
Mm-hmm.
I find with correction, especially with a little bit older kids who have a little bit of autonomy and you're not exactly micromanaging all of the activities of their day, so you don't know what's going on with them, and so there may be some behavior that needs to be corrected, like you talked about, you know, coming in late, for example. So I find first treating them like an adult in that first, hopefully you're going to seek to understand, you know, so tell me about what happened. You know, what you are past your curfew, but help me understand, you know, what were the reasons for that, instead of going right in for the correction, right? Seeking to understand, you know, let's talk about what led up to that. I think
I know that in, you know, in life there are traps, you know, there's quicksand everywhere. And I'm wondering, since you have spent so much time really coming to grips with the dynamic, the thought processes that are involved in raising children that are psychologically healthy. What are the traps that parents can look out for? Because I know they're traps, and just wondering what they might be. Do you know what I'm? Do you know what I mean?
Can you give an example?
Well, for instance. When a child is actually trying to get away with something, like when they're trying to, you know, there gets to a time when there's the good cop, bad cop kind of a thing, or if daddy says no, mommy will say yes. The child will go to mommy and trick her into thinking that this is a brand new question and get the response they want. So that's a trap that a parent can easily fall into. It's like, oops, you know, and so then you have to reconnect with your spouse and say, we got to watch out for that. So yes, or you know, and there's, you know, sudden outbursts, for instance, in a store, for instance, of a young child. So these kinds of like, oh, what do I do now? Red flag kind of things. Does that help?
It does. Yes,
define
thank
the
you.
question?
So these are what I call watch fors. They're like a litmus test or a barometer for how things are going. And whenever I see my child or hear my child engaged in some sort of an unhelpful behavior, and I like to frame it as positively as possible, that my child is having a hard time with something, I always ask myself, I get a little bit curious and I ask myself, what might be their underlying need? There's something going on for them that is leading to this behavior, because I know that my kids, they want and need to feel close to me. They want to cooperate with me. They want to be part of the team in that social, most important social relationship. So if they're not, if there's something that's working against that, something's going on. They need something. So I always look to the need that's beneath the behavior, and that is a real cue to me that I need to start with rebuilding that bridge, that connection again, and helping us to feel those warm, fuzzy feelings toward each other and to feel close and heard and respected first. Then I can look at, okay, well, this choice that you made, how did that work out? Well, my friend got really mad at me. Okay, so what's something you could do differently, or how would you like that to play out next time? So then we have the conversation after. That conversation is going to have limited impact, and in fact, my child may tune out completely if I haven't first established that openness and that communication and let them know that I'm willing to hear them and they will be willing to hear me, and then we can get into the conversation. I know with teenagers, you've had a lot of experience with either that willingness to open up versus shutting down. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, this is where I think if everybody could take coaches training, even if they never used it in the realm of professional coaching, it is so beneficial when you're raising kids. And I've been raising kids for 31 years across my 20s to my 50s. And I find that asking genuine questions that cause them sometimes not even to talk, but to go, to think. But like Alison said, instead of launching into the unhelpful behavior or talking about everything that's wrong, asking, so can you help me understand what's going on with your group of friends, or would you be willing to talk about what's changed in the last week, or give me some insight about when you talk in those really open terms, it really invites that connection, and you really do walk away from even teenagers going, oh, that was good. And Alison and I were discussing the other day when we got together to plan for this show, that takes a lot more time. It's not convenient to parent that way, is it? It's not convenient. It's
tiring.
A little tiring.
At times.
It takes preparation on the part of the parents, but the payoff is huge. The payoff is huge because I guarantee you the teenager, even in their teenage brain will go, well, that was nice. They will feel good about that. And you have strengthened or reconnected that little lapse in connection.
It's an empowering kind of a conversation that you're thinking of having.
It is.
So what I'm wondering is, it's all fine and dandy to run through the meadow full of beautiful wildflowers and do all these nice things, but every once in a while, things break down.
It gets a little hairy.
And so from a practical point of view, because you're going to have plenty of viewers that are not running through the wildflowers all the time. They've got
and let me be honest, it is not all wildflowers.
Yeah.
So yesterday just fell apart. But.
So what do you do? What advice can you give to parents who are just like ready to throw their hands up and say, you know what, this is just, I am really at a loss for what to do. And then what winds up happening, of course, is they go back to their own childhood behavior and things unravel rather quickly. So what advice have you for parents who are really get frustrated?
I have a quick one, and then I'll hand it over to Alison. Look for patterns of how things go. Look for the cycle of how situations go, because they may find that there is a predictable pattern. And I'll give one quick example. I have one of my children, she's a teenager now, she's a great kid, but she has an instant need to communicate how she's feeling, and sometimes that, it is what it is. Sometimes it's not a meadow full of wildflowers. So I've come to learn by just observing it, there's a pattern that she kind of, explodes, makes her communication, fully clear, stomps off, and an hour or so later, there's time to reconnect and go, okay, let's talk about what's going on. So in the early years, my initial thing was to react to that right in the moment, want to get through to what was going on right then. I learned over time that that's not appropriate. Just let her get her piece, say her piece, have the chance to diffuse it, and then come back together a little bit later. So my little piece of advice is look for patterns, that you can then learn from and deal with it better.
So that's not an enabling technique? In other words, what I'm wondering is you're placating the outburst, which
Interesting enough.
Time has proven that it worked, but
interestingly enough, because I thought that very same thing, because that's a departure from, because like I say, my oldest child is 31 and she's 15, so that is a departure even from the way I would have parented the first child. But oddly enough, I have found that as she gets older, the incidences are getting fewer, the duration and intensity of the outbursts are getting less, and we're coming together to, quicker. So I'm not even sure if there's any science on all of that. However,
is.
Oh, is there?
There is.
Well, I guess innately or you know,
Good instincts.
good instincts,
Yeah.
I guess,
Yeah.
maybe. But yeah, I find that the intensity and the duration are all lessening, and you know, I am always talking to her, communicating about, you know, out in the real world, when you leave this house, you're probably going to find that that's really not going to work for you. And so over time, her coping mechanisms are becoming better.
Well, you know, one of the things that pops into my mind is that, you know, we're all individuals. We have our own personalities, and those personalities begin to develop at a very early age, like in the womb. Yeah. And so what I'm wondering is, at some point, like in your example, her personality is developing, and it's different than your personality. Yeah. And so as a parent, we oftentimes want our children to be safe. So we know safety is what we know. So if they're doing something different, it instills a bit of fear in us. How do we break through that barrier to give them the freedom to develop their own personalities without us being too overbearing? Is that a fair question?
It is, and it's a simple answer, but it's also not simple. The simple answer is we need to work on ourselves. And if something is a real trigger for us, we need to give that some attention, because there's a need of ours that's not being met. Maybe something needs to be explored, healed, examined, just become more conscious about the pattern. The longer answer is that takes some time and some work and reflection and often an outside perspective to help us see what we're having a hard time seeing. Well, sorry, got distracted by that phone.
No, but
does that answer your question?
Absolutely, because I think that one of the things, and I think this is possibly, you know, more in your bailiwick, is in dealing with people who are in sort of a crisis of some kind. How do they deal with it? And the fact that we cannot do these things ourselves all the time. We need professionals, or we need a friend, or we need to talk to mom, or whatever it might be. I think that is would be a critical trigger mechanism for when parents get themselves into these, like, I don't know what to do now kind of situations.
I really wish that people felt that it was okay. You know, I go back to something I remember my mother saying when I was young. She used to say that sometimes if you just say things out loud, they suddenly solve themselves, seem less daunting. And she was really right. You have to be able to step out of your head, because you just have the same thoughts and ideas swirling around. And that becomes even more claustrophobic when it's a problem, let's say with connecting with your child, for example. To be able to get out of your own head, hear somebody else's perspective, have another train of thought come in, you know, it is just so valuable. And all of a sudden a solution can be so simple to what is causing a lot of stress in parents raising children. So I think, you know, getting other people's perspectives. I bounce things off Alison all the time, and we're very respectful of each other's viewpoints, but just hearing somebody else's take on something can send you off in a whole different direction.
And I love this line of questioning that you have, Jay, that these red flags, and when we feel like something is off, that's really when we do need to come back to the core of it all, and that's the relationship. That close relationship is going to be the foundation. If we feel that things are heading in a bad direction, things are getting heated, we sense that power struggle starting, us as the adult, we're really the only one who has the experience and knowledge and skills and awareness to stop that. Because no one wins when there's a power struggle. Even if someone seems like they're coming out on top, it's not a healthy way to resolve things. So if we come back to the relationship and just say, whoa, let's just take a break here for a second. Like, this isn't working for either of us. Yeah, I know. Okay, so what do we have in common? Find that common ground. take a little break. Like, let's just go get a drink of water, or let's play a game for a couple minutes, take our mind off it, then we'll come back to it. I mean, we really do need to commit to come back to it, and maybe address how our child is speaking with us when they're upset and need to vent. We can always come back to it, but we can't always come back and repair the relationship if we've gotten into that power struggle and it's gone too far or gone on for years.
So we have just a minute left in the show right now. So reviewing the main points, what would you like the viewers to take away as the most important thing about making connections with their children?
Making that your priority before everything else. Obviously, if there's a safety issue, we need to address the safety, always safety first. But make that our priority, that the relationship is okay, that we're feeling connected and part of a team. Connect, then direct. That's my biggest suggestion as a takeaway.
And I think, you know, children, whether they tell you or whether they don't, they just want your time, energy, and focus. And that is the most important thing that you can give them, is your time, energy, and focus.
I think it's just, it shows how important connections are for all of us. It's a human thing. And thank you so much for coming on and talking today about this really important subject. And thank you all for watching the show today. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I look forward to seeing you again on another episode of Fundy Tidings.